Hello everybody. I got asked for some pictures about what I did to diagnose a bad idle air control valve on an O2 Excursion. O2 or O3? O3 Excursion with heavy GVW, heavy duty, super duty. I'm sure it's the same as the F250, F350. All right. It was what it was doing. It was racing the idle when you get it out on the road and put it in park when you got to wherever you're going, and it would run up to around 2,000, 2,200 RPM and just stay there. Well, I went and looked, and I was thinking, this is the PCV valve. That's not going to be a problem on this engine because it vents into in front of the butterfly. So it's atmosphere air pressure right here. There's no vacuum. This top one, I wasn't sure what it was. I pulled it off and I got absolute industrial strength shop vac vacuum. While it didn't change what the engine was doing at all. I stuck my thumb over it and it almost sucked me in. But it shut down to about 400 RPM when I did that. That means that my idle air valve was stuck open. Now, was it stuck open because it went bad? Was it stuck open because we had a bad wire? I know nothing about these. Engines are supposed to have a carburetor on them, not all this electronic junk. So I guess this is a modern one to me, even though it's 17 years old, 18 years old, depending on when it was built in that model year. Anyway, the idle air valve is that shiny thing you can see back in there, and it's got a plug on it. So to get that off, you got to take your throttle cables off, take that spring off right there, and I took that plate right there off too. You could probably get to it if you didn't have these great big old paws. You could probably get to it without doing all that. But if you drop one of those bolts, it's going to fall down someplace right on top of the crank, down in the open middle of the engine. I don't like that idea either. So what I did was I took all this stuff off. I was getting ahead of myself there. And I took off this vacuum line going to the brake booster just to get it up out of the way. Flipped it up here on top. And of course took off the air duct, took it off here and here and just pulled it out. Actually, I set it right up here because I knew I wasn't going to get finished with it in one evening, being I'm 25 miles from a parts house. And that allowed the hood to sit down without latching, without slamming latched all the way down, and it didn't hurt anything. Okay. All that stuff over there, and then that one plug right there going to the throttle position sensor. And then there's 4 8mm head bolts hold the upper manifold to the lower intake manifold. It's got a little green O-ring type gasket. That seemed to be fine. I put it back together, it worked just fine. So I'm not terribly worried about that one. When I got the thing off, I should have gotten some pictures while I had it all apart, but I did not. I took that thing off, I blew through it, the idle air valve, and it was wide open. So I called up the parts house, and they got one off a shelf and blew through it, and it was wide open. So that's not a problem. And I checked the voltage coming out of the wiring loom, and I had battery voltage with the key on and 0 with the key off. And I had a resistance of 10.5 ohms on the old idle air valve. So from testing everything, it should have worked, but it wasn't. And seeing as how I had the 10.5 volts key on and 0 or 12.5 volts key on, 0 key off, I figured the only thing it could have been was that valve. The only thing I did not do was go plug it back in and see if it shut, but that was mainly because I don't think I could have gotten my fat ass up on that thing and blown into it with the key on, yeah, to see if it closed. So I didn't do it. Anyway, cut to the chase. Next day I went off to Parts House, picked up a new one, put it on, put it all back together, and cranked it up. It did its normal run up to about 1300 cold, and then slowed back down to about 600 where it's supposed to be, just a little over 500. So I bundled Mama up in the car and we went to town just to give it a road test. On the way back, I found I had no power at all. It was laggy, no power, nothing. And sat there racking my brain. It was about this time of day when we left, and that's the sun going down right over the barn right now. So it was dark when we got back. I laid there and thought about what it is that might be wrong now. Did I get a bad one out of the box that stuck a different way? 3 o'clock in the morning, I got up because nature called me, and it dawned on me that, well, folks, let me just put it this way. When you put the thing back together, you need to plug exactly the same number of plugs in as you unplugged. I came back out here at first light and discovered that plug right there laying on the manifold. That was aggravating. Plugged it back in, seems to be running fine now. Anyway, if you have a little idle problem going high, racing on you, doesn't seem to want to come down. Kind of like if you got one with a carburetor, like the choke was stuck up on the step, and you goose the foot feed and it's supposed to idle back down. When you goose the foot feed, it'd run up and then come right back down where it was. That's what this was doing. Like the step on automatic choke was stuck. If you run into that problem, it's probably your idle air valve. And when you get through with it, if it seems real laggy and no power, it's probably because you forgot to plug your throttle position sensor back in. I guess what it was trying to do, it was having to go a roundabout way to even make the thing run, and seeing that it was leaning out, because I got a check engine light when I cranked it back up after I put the new idle air valve on it. And when I put the reader on it, it was saying it was oxygen sensor alert, out of range. And what it makes sense that it was doing was the only reason it was still running. It didn't have a clue where the butterfly was, but it was just seeing that it was getting lean and giving it enough gas to satisfy the oxygen sensor, riching it back up, which was the only thing that allowed it to run to town and run back. And so I guess it could have left me on the side of the road. I'm kind of happy with Old Blue for that. I hated these Triton engines when they came out, but this one I'm growing more and more respect for it. These 2-valve Tritons, this one's got 190,000 on it, and there's no lift or noise, no nothing. It's just, none of the clicking and clacking and sewing machine type noises coming out from under it like my son's 04. It sounds like it's fixing to start shelling parts out on the ground under it. But that's a whole nother story, and I'm glad he's got it and I don't have it anymore. Thanks for listening, y'all. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.